So hello guys, welcome to UPSC Geek by NRG. Today we are starting with lecture number 14, that is part second of the Machiavelli series. Okay, we have already done with part 1 of Machiavelli where we have mainly dealt with the life and time of Machiavelli, the methodology of Machiavelli, the various influences which nudged Machiavelli to come out with his own political theories, and etc. in part 1 of the lecture series. If you haven't watched that particular lecture, I would love to have you all go and watch that particular lecture, because it will be a basic building block for the further lecture series of Machiavelli. Okay, because until and unless you are not aware about the various influences on Machiavelli, you will not be able to make that particular connection for the further theories and political ideologies of Machiavelli. So with that, let's start with part 2 of Machiavelli. But before moving further, I'd love to have you all subscribe to the channel, that is UPSC Geek, and show your love by liking the videos. Okay, so let's get started with the instruction given to the let's get started with the introduction of the prince first. Okay, the magnum opus. So basically Machiavelli in his time wrote mainly three great works. The first is the Prince, which is considered to be the magnum opus of Machiavelli. The second is the Discourses, which is the work of mature Machiavelli, and third is the Art of the War. Okay, like the co-relevant book of the Sun Tzu's Art of War, where the Sun Tzu talks about mainly the Chinese civilization. Machiavelli more or less talks about the Italian civilization, right? So let's get started with the introduction of Prince. The Prince is known as the best book ever written in the field of statecraft, right? As we know that the father of political philosophy, that is Plato, who mainly deals with the philosophy of the state, like what are the various philosophy behind the state and how to get an ideal state, what a state should be like. And here Machiavelli deals mainly with the art of politics or art of statecrafts. Okay, how can one be best at the art of statecraft, right? That's why there is a term called as Machiavellianism, and which has very kind of cunning connotation when it comes to international politics, right? So that's why Machiavelli is sometimes famous and also infamously known for his art of statecraft, right? So statecraft is the management of power, which we will be seeing further in the detail, how we are talking or how we are correlating Machiavelli with the art of statecraft, because the kind of instructions which Machiavelli gives to the young prince, which clearly explicit his idea or caliber of statecraft to be a better ruler or to be a better monarch, right? So since Machiavelli gives the power view of politics, he is known as father of political realism. So take into consideration here is that there are mainly two broad school of international relation. First is the realist school and second is the liberal schools. Okay, so realist school mainly believe in the constant tussle between the different states, which says that there is a constant war going on between the states, which lead to the upcoming of the best among the rest. And the liberal school on the same plane, they believe that there is a peace which exists between the different states, because men are the rational beings, and hence they look forward to cooperate and collaborate when it comes to trade and commerce, and hence there are less chances that there will be chances of war between them. So these are the two broad schools when it comes to international politics, right? There are other schools as well, like critical schools, which mainly propound the idea of feminist theories, neoliberals, and etc. So we will be seeing of the particular schools which are very fascinating and important for the sake of PSIR in the paper 2 part B of the lectures. But now let's just have an idea what a realist school is, right? Because until and unless you don't have an idea, you will not be able to make that mind connection or the mental connection, right? So statecraft is the management of power. So since now I have just said that the realist school were the mainly propounder of a constant war, right? And hence Machiavelli comes from the same ideologue or the same background, right? And hence his approach towards the international politics or the internal politics as well will be very calibratic in nature, like it will very dexterous in nature, so that he will be instructing to the prince to be very aware about the various happening in the state, so that he can come out with the more practical solutions, right? Because in one of the instructions, he suggests to the prince that a prince should be clever like a fox and brave like a lion, right? This clearly explicits his notion of realism, right? And for this he is known as father of political realism. So the prince contains set of instructions for any enterprising person who wants to come to power and consolidate his power. So prince is basically an anthology of 11 different principles or instructions which is being rendered to any enterprising person or the prince. So basically जो prince magnum opus है मैकियावेली का, वो 11 डिफरेंट प्रिंसिपल अपने बुक में कंटेन करता है, जो कि कोई भी प्रिंस, इंटरप्राइजिंग प्रिंस आना चाहता है रूलरशिप के लिए, उसके लिए एक काइंड ऑफ इंस्ट्रक्शंस है कि अगर आप आते हो तो आपकी पर्सनालिटी ऐसे कुछ होनी चाहिए. आप एक you should be a brave like a lion and clever like a fox, right? You should give more importance to sovereignty and etc. So these are the 11 important principles which are contained in the magnum opus, that is the prince, as an instruction to the young enterprising person who is wanting to come to the power and consolidate his power. So Machiavelli was against feudalism. Feudalism is a system based on birth. So basically Machiavelli believed that the cause of war in the Florence or the Italian peninsula is basically due to the corruptness of monarchy and feudalism, which existed in tandem with each other, right? So he was basically against the corruption and feudalism in the Italian peninsula, right? So Machiavelli represents the psychology of emerging capitalist class. He was against the feudal class, which is basically based on the property, based on the birth, right? If my father had a land, I'll also be having the ownership of that particular property, and hence it was passed by inheritance, right? And hence Machiavelli was against it, and he represented the psychology of the emerging capitalist class, क्योंकि वो खुद एक rich banking class, that is Machiavelli family से आता था in Florence, राइट एंड वो बहुत ज़्यादा क्लोज था मेडिसी फैमिली से, जो डिफैक्टो रूलर थे वहाँ के. सो दिस इज द बेसिक लॉजिक बिहाइंड दिस. So let's start with what are the instructions given to the prince. So we are basically starting with the instructions, but before starting, let's look at the questions which will be checking your progress at the end, right? So that you can have the idea. So keep these questions in your mind. So the fourth question number 1, 2 and 3 we have already seen in the previous lecture, right? And this is question number 4, describes Machiavelli conception of the human nature, right? We will be starting with his instruction to the prince in the magnum opus, that is the prince, right? So he will be talking about his perspective on the human nature. So the fourth question is about describe Machiavelli's conception of the human nature. The fifth question, the prince is a masterpiece of Machiavelli, explained, right? So just I have told that how important the prince is. The prince is considered to be a magnum opus of Machiavelli. In the same context, it has been asked that the prince is a masterpiece of Machiavelli, explained. And the sixth is examine Machiavelli's advice to the prince for maintaining a state. So this is again a part of different instructions which has been given to prince for the better governance in the state, right? So again you will be able to attempt these answers post going through the lecture. So let's start with the instruction. Okay, so the first instruction which Machiavelli is giving to the prince is on the nature of the profession, right? If you are wanting to or willing to come to any profession, you should know what the nature of the profession is. ये बहुत ज़्यादा यूपीएससी के लिए भी अप्लाई होता है. क्या होता है, लोग एक ईगो में आके इस जर्नी में आ तो जाते हैं until like without realizing or analyzing what the profession or the nature of profession is, and बाद में फिर वो regret करते हैं, and hence the rate of attrition is very high in this profession, right? So first instruction which is being given by Machiavelli to the prince is on the nature of the profession, that before coming to this profession you should have the idea of what this profession is like, right? So let's see what the instruction is being given by Machiavelli to the prince. Since prince is entering in politics, prince must understand the type of profession politics is. One who sacrifices what is for what ought to be will not only ruin himself but will also bring destruction to his own people, right? So if you take this particular statement into consideration, so I will reiterate this statement for you once again, right? One who sacrifices what is kind of present for what ought to be. What ought to be is more idealistic approach, right? Will not only ruin himself but will also bring destruction to his own people. So what this particular statement is symbolizing? This particular statement is symbolizing the more realistic approach of Machiavelli, and he is thus instructing to the prince as well to be more realistic, to focus on what is rather than what ought to be, right? As we have done in Plato, that Plato is very idealistic. Plato was very idealistic philosopher, right? And he always thought of an idealistic state, right, where he always emphasized upon the virtue state or the what ought to be rather than what is. But again there came this student of Plato, that was Aristotle, whose basic idea was the golden mean, who was a pragmatic philosopher or thinker, right? And hence Aristotle was a huge influence on Machiavelli. Machiavelli also continues the legacy into the modern political science, and instructs to the prince that one should focus more on what is rather than what ought to be. Okay, if one focuses more on what ought to be, what will happen, what will be the consequence? Will not only ruin himself but will also bring destruction to his own people, right? So this is a kind of deviation from the reality, and hence causing destructions not only upon oneself but also upon the people. So this is the basic idea, the first idea which is being given by the Machiavelli to the prince about the basis about the nature of profession, that in this profession you should focus more on what is than what ought to be. ये पॉलिटिक्स के प्रोफेशन में एक रूलर को ज़्यादा what is में फोकस करना चाहिए than what ought to be. He should be more practical than more idealistic. This is the first instruction. How we live is far removed from how we ought to live. One who tries to find goodness in every profession must necessarily come into grave again, right? So here again he is basically denoting to the ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and etc., who always talked about the correlation of ethics and politics. They always taken ethics and politics side by side, right? But here the prince is getting instructed by the Machiavelli is that one who tries to find goodness in every profession must necessarily come to grief, right? क्योंकि politics is more about the statecraft, it is more about the realistic situation which is prevailing in the particular state, right? Again I will take you back to the time of Machiavelli. We have seen how he was the secretary to the chancery of Florence, right? And there was a continuous war which was going on in the principalities or among the principalities, 5 principalities of Italy, right? And hence he realized, taking into consideration that there is a constant tussle or the threat which is being posed upon Florence, right? And in those kind of situation, and he himself mastered the ancient Greek philosophers and ancient Greek literature when he was just 7 years of age, right? He might have also come with all those idealistic notions, ethical notions in the field of politics, but upon experiencing the realities in politics, he realized that one who tries to find goodness in every profession must necessarily come to grief, because he himself was experiencing that sort of grief during his experience in the Florence. So this is the basic idea. So this is how you connect the history with the context, people, and make that connection. It will for sure help you remember much effectively. No teacher will tell you such a connection between the ideas, and in every thinker, until and unless you make that particular connection, you will not be able to remember the basic idea is, because at the end we have to understand the psychology of a thinker. We ourselves are thinker, राइट, वी आर आवर सेल्स आर कमिंग विद अ पर्टिकुलर स्टोरी. हम भी कोई ना कोई अपने हिस्ट्री से आ रहे हैं, हमने भी कुछ ना कुछ ऐसा इवेंट एक्सपीरियंस किया है. एंड अगर कोई उस इवेंट को समझ सके बेटर वे में, तो वो ज़्यादा आसानी से समझ पाएगा कि हमारी थिंकिंग कैसी होगी. राइट, लेट्स से कोई बहुत ज़्यादा एलाइट क्लास से आता है, तो उसकी थिंकिंग, उसकी पर्सपेक्टिव, आउटलुक थोड़ी वैसे होती है. Right, so this is how our history shapes our perspective, right? So here the same is also true with Machiavelli, who is coming with a particular history, but particular history of war, tussle and etc., which shaped his outlook as more realist in nature, right? So this is the statement one needs to remember, that one who tries to find goodness in every profession must necessarily come to grief. So let's say there is a question asked, right? That is comment Machiavelli instruction to the prince on the nature of profession. One can start this particular answer by mentioning some of the highlights, like this: one who tries to find goodness in every profession must necessarily come to grief. It will give good edge over the answer, right? So as we live with so many people who are not so good, so basically he is again expliciting his experience during the time of Florence, because of the idea that we live with so many people who are not so good. The profession is also not good, because at the end in politics we have to engage in statecraft, right? And as we know that state is the individual writ large, the Plato's idea. It is basically a constitution of various individuals who are not so good, and hence the art of statecraftship or the art of polity will not be so comforting, right? So again, the context here is The Prince is the best book ever written in the field of statecraft. It contains the set of advices by Machiavelli to a political entrepreneur with respect to the various aspects of the field of politics. So this is basically giving the idea that this particular instruction on the nature of profession is coming from The Prince, which is the best ever book written on the field of statecraft. That's why Machiavelli is also regarded as the father of political realism, right? So in above statement we can see the beginning of political realism. So as we know that the Machiavelli was the thinker who stand on the threshold of modern political philosophy, right? He was the kind of transition from a dark age to the modern age, and hence Machiavelli is standing on the threshold. So Machiavelli introduces the nature of profession to the prince and what qualities prince should possess to be successful in the profession. Hence he was coming from the dark age. He was more realistic in his outlook, and hence he was expecting the same from the prince, to be better at the statecraft, and hence he is rendering his set of instructions in his magnum opus, that is The Prince, to the young enterprising prince who is wanting to come to the power. Okay, so unlike Plato, whose philosopher king lives in the world of ideas, Machiavelli wants his prince to look at the things as they are rather than they should be. According to him, if a prince sacrifices what is for what ought to be, he will certainly harm not only himself but also his people. So he is basically trying to delimit ethics from politics, right? Because these are two different games, and when it comes to politics, because in ethics we always look for what ought to be, right? But in politics one should always keep in mind what is rather than what ought to be, because it will be more realistic in approach, more pragmatic in approach. But if someone is focusing more on what ought to be, will certainly bring harm to not only himself but also upon his people. This is what is being instructed to the prince by Machiavelli. Okay, so according to Machiavelli, politics is not ethics. Politics is uninspiring, yet it is the fact. In politics, prince will meet such people who are not good. Hence, prince should not try to find goodness in every profession. So the basic idea is that politics is basically a polity or the activity by the statecrafts, right? Or the people who are engaging in the rulership, or the monarchs during his time, and hence most of the time they were not so kind. They were cruel, because they were mainly influenced by the expansionist policy of their time. They were just wanting to acquire the territories of different regions. They were engaging in a lot of cruel wars and etc. And hence, looking that or taking that into consideration, prince is being advised that the people in politics are not always so good, and hence prince should also not look forward to find goodness in this profession. If prince will try to find goodness in politics, he is bound to be disappointed and may get hurt. Hence prince should know how to be bad rather than how to be good, because if he will be bad, he can have control over him, because he can be good with his people. But if he will be bad, he will be kind of creating deterrence on the mind of enemy, right? That the particular here, the term bad should not be confused with the literal meaning of being bad. Here term bad generally mean being a little bit more stronger, being a little bit more cruel, in the sense that just to create a deterrence, right? When someone finds you very good, they might take advantage of you, they might take advantage by manipulating you. That is all Machiavellianism is all about, right? So here this thing needs to be seen in that context. It is not complete bad, it is basically a other side of the spectrum of being good. Yep. So, aspirants, let's see critical evaluation of the Machiavelli's advice to the prince on the nature of profession. Machiavelli is one of the most criticized figure in the history of Western philosophy. Let's see why. It is irony that he was criticized for telling the truth. According to Dunning, it is paradox that everyone is Machiavellian in politics, but no one accepts himself to be the Machiavellian. Okay. So oftentimes we hear from the Honorable External Affairs Minister, that is S. Jaishankar, that Western countries are Machiavellian in nature, but they don't accept one to be. Because in diplomacy, most of the time, diplomacy works on the basis of persuasion, influence, manipulation, and etc., so as to preserve one's national interest, and hence it is very pragmatic to apply the Machiavellian notion when it comes to international politics, right? But no one accepts one to be. One of the major critics of Machiavelli is Sabine. So first critic is by Dunning, that it is paradox that everyone is Machiavellian in nature in politics, but no one accepts himself to be Machiavellian, right? And the second critic is Sabine, right? And Sabine criticized Machiavelli on the basis that Machiavelli is very narrowly dated and narrowly located. See, okay. So let's see how Sabine, on what basis Sabine is choosing to criticize Machiavelli as narrowly dated and narrowly located. So basically, Sabine is wanting to say that his event, that his political theory is mainly influenced by the events which are very narrowly located and narrowly dated to his time in Italy or the Florence, right? His idea further he elaborates is that had he belonged to some other time and space, his views would have been different. He is trying to say that अगर मैकियावेली कोई और टाइम पे एंड कोई और स्पेस पे होता तो उसका जो थॉट है वो ऐसा नहीं होता. And his thought is majorly influenced by the events which were taking place in Florence, that is Italy, and between the five principalities, which are very narrowly located and narrowly dated, right? And hence, had he belonged to some other time and space, his views would have been completely different. It is true that Machiavelli's ideas were the product of his time, but it would not be correct to say that Machiavelli's ideas lack universalism or transcendentalism, right? But it would be not very much mature to say that his idea lacks universalism or transcendentalism, that his ideas cannot be applied throughout the universe or throughout the world, because we see till date that his ideas are very much pragmatic in international politics. We tend to utilize Machiavellian approach when it comes to international politics. So how can we say that his ideas lack universalism or transcendentalism? Even the Machiavelli is the most precise, a most apt philosopher when it comes to universalism or transcendentalism, right? So this is the critical evaluation. So the two thinkers who criticized Machiavelli, first is Dunning and second is Sabine, which needs to be taken into the consideration, right? And now we come to the second advice, that is on the human nature, which is being given to the prince by Machiavelli. So here on human nature, Machiavelli is advising to the prince that man is selfish, coward, fickle-minded, ungrateful, fearful, and avaricious in nature. Okay, so what does this term avaricious mean? Avaricious mean basically the man who is too much greedy, who can go to any height just to fulfill his personal passions and desire. Hence, man is selfish, coward, fickle-minded, ungrateful, fearful, and avaricious. Okay, so it is based on the analysis of what he observed and understanding of history. So basically, we have seen that its methodology basically comprised of history and empiricism, that is the experience of the current situation. And hence, when he experienced his time in Florence, he realized that men are selfish, coward, fickle-minded, and avaricious. Okay, politics should be based on understanding of human nature, because he himself propounded the idea that a prince must be very much aware about the human psychology and human nature. Since prince has to deal with humans, he must understand the human nature as it is rather than prince think it to be, right? So he is completely delineating ethics from politics here, and again emphasizing more on more realist perspective, that is prince should focus more on understanding the human nature than the prince actually conceives it to be, right? Because most of the time one tends to think that people are good, people are innocent, people are very grateful and etc, but it is not likely that people are so and so, and hence prince needs to take into the consideration most realist perspective by understanding the nature and psychology of human beings, right? So let's see on what basis Machiavelli is propounding his idea of or his view on the human nature. So according to Machiavelli, history is the best guide to politics. On the basis of observation from his time and as found in history, he gives his view on human nature. So basically history is something upon which he is giving his basis. He has analyzed history, and according to that he is giving his view on human nature. So according to Machiavelli, throughout human history, human nature has remained constant. The elemental characteristics of human nature are: first, man is selfish in nature. He is saying that man is selfish in nature. Let's see why. Since man is selfish, man will always give primacy to his own interest over the interest of prince, right? So here Machiavelli is basically advising to the prince that since man is selfish in nature, the prince should understand that man will always give primacy to his own interest over the interest of the prince. Since okay, since man is selfish by nature, man is also ungrateful by nature. So whatever you do for the people, they will be ungrateful and they will always criticize the ruler. It means that man will forget the favors done to him by the prince in case of his interest demand. So since man is selfish, man is fickle minded. What is fickle mindedness? Fickle mindedness is basically a fluctuating mentality where one is not very much to the particular side. He continuously changes sides, right? So that is fickle mindedness. It is not focusing or standing to a particular mind, a particular stance. So man is, since man is selfish, man is fickle minded because man will always chase his particular passions and desires. He will always change side in order to meet his own interest and selfish nature. So it can easily change the sides. Above analysis so that the prince cannot take the support of any person for granted, right? Because again, what was happening was that during his time there was a continuous tussle which was going on between the 5 principalities of Italy, right? And hence he was seeking help from one principality and the other principalities. Let's say there is a B C D E 5 principalities, right? Hence there was a threat from principality A to the principality B. The B would seek help from C, but let's say C is getting better offers from A. The C will change his side with A because man is selfish in nature and hence they will change side to meet their own interest. So this is the basic analogy when it comes to his view on human nature, that is man is selfish in nature, and that is what was happening during his time in Italian peninsula, right? Between the 5 principalities there was a continuous threat among the 5 principalities, and hence nobody were trusting each other because they understood the notion that nobody could be trusted because they all are fickle minded and they can change their sides just for the benefits of personal interest. Okay, so above analysis so that the prince cannot take the support of any person for granted. Prince should always be careful because anyone can betray him anytime. Even if, let's say, a particular ally, a particular principalities, even they agreed to support, they could change side anytime. Hence the Machiavelli is suggesting to the prince that he should always be careful because anyone can betray him anytime, right? So this was the basic idea. The first base is that man is selfish in nature. The second is man is coward by nature. Let's see how man is coward by nature. Since man is coward by nature, man is also fearful by nature. Man is fearful or insecure. Though the qualities like selfishness go against the interest of prince, the qualities that man is coward and fearful can be manipulated by the prince to his own advantage. Though man is coward by nature, the Machiavelli is advising to the prince, this can be taken as an advantage for the ruler because men can, if they are coward, they will always be fearful, they will always be insecure. Hence the Machiavelli is advising to the prince that the ruler can take advantage of that insecurity by manipulating them to his own advantage, right? So this is what is the basic idea. So long prince is able to convince that only prince can provide security of life, people will remain obliged to prince. वो बहुत ज़्यादा डरे हुए हैं, वो बहुत ज़्यादा इनसिक्योर हैं, इसीलिए मैकियावेली प्रिंस को एडवाइस कर रहा है कि यू कैन मैनिपुलेट देम एंड आप उनकी एडवांटेज ले सकते हैं. हम बहुत ज़्यादा कमज़ोर लोगों की ही बहुत ज़्यादा एडवांटेज लेते हैं. क्यों? क्योंकि हम उन्हें मैनिपुलेट कर सकते हैं. दे आर इनसिक्योर, राइट? एंड हेंस दे कैन the prince can convince those insecure people that the prince or the rulership is the only institution which can provide security to them, and hence make them obliged to the monarchy, right? So this is the basic idea behind man is coward by nature. The third is man is avaricious. What is avaricious? So men are basically extremely greedy. Man is materialist by nature. Man has a love for property. Hence if prince create conditions where people make money or earn property, then also they will remain loyal to prince. Example, China's checkbook diplomacy in present context, right? So basically the Machiavelli is advising to the prince that men are very materialistic in nature. So if the policies of the monarchy or the government is pro capitalist, they will always be loyal to the government or to the rulership, and hence they will be patriot as well. Okay, example, China's checkbook diplomacy, how China gives a lend easy money to different countries just to take advantage of them, just to make them think that China is pro them, China is helping them, right? And hence they stay obliged to the China. But though the real story is something different, right? But this is the basic idea behind it. So these are the three bases upon which Machiavelli is giving his view on the human nature. The first was man is selfish by nature, second is man is coward by nature, and third is man is extremely greedy or avaricious in nature. Okay, so Machiavelli also suggests prince that a wise prince never confiscates the property, rather he executes, right? So as we all know that Machiavelli himself is coming from a capitalist class, right? He represents the thinking of capitalist class, hence his idea will always be pro-capitalist, right? And hence he is suggesting to the prince that one should always remember that man can never, or the prince should never look forward to confiscate one property, because man can forget the death of his father but he cannot forget the loss of his patrimony, right? Man अपने father के death को भूल सकता है but he cannot forget the loss of his patrimony or the property that he inherited from his father, right? So this is the basic and most important statement which needs to be taken into consideration, that man can forget the loss of his father but will never forget the loss of his patrimony. He also advises prince not to touch the women of the citizen, because men are possessive about their women also, very practical, right? So basically if you will think very deeply, you will realize that the Machiavelli is basically suggesting the basic psychology of people, right? We are sometimes very possessive about our patrimony, our properties, our women's, and etc., right? And hence these are some of the basic sentiments of human beings which Machiavelli is advising to the prince not to encroach upon. Okay, because if prince does so, if there is an over encroachment, the people might turn revolutionary and they can overturn the monarchy, right? So hence Machiavelli is trying to suggest that though men are selfish, men are coward, men are avaricious in nature, men are very much possessive about their property, men are very much possessive about their women, hence prince should not encroach their personal sphere, right? So this is the basic idea. Okay, so let's again do a critical evaluation of Machiavelli's view on human nature. So according to Sabine, Machiavelli gives such a pessimistic view on human nature because of his own experience in Italy of his time. Okay, again, see, when it comes to Machiavelli, in throughout different instructions and theories, the criticism of Sabine can be used, because he says that Machiavelli is narrowly dated and narrowly located, and to some extent it is also true, but it will be very immature to say that his ideas are not universal or transcendentalism. Okay, because still they are being utilized, so that can be used as a conclusion or way forward. But remember this statement that Machiavelli ideas are narrowly dated and narrowly located, which can be used throughout his different theories. Okay, so it is true that Machiavelli's description of human nature is one-sided. However, it is very important for prince to know the dark aspect of human nature. right? Because we ourselves are human beings. Even prince is the human being, he knows the good side, but it is sometimes very important to know the dark side of the human nature, because it creates more impact rather than the good side, right? Because see, if we do a lot of good things about something, but if we do something bad about something or someone, the dark side of the person comes out, and it can do more destructions than the good side, right? So that is why the Machiavelli is advising to the prince that the prince should always be aware about the dark side of the human nature, and that's why he is telling that man is selfish, man is coward, and man is avaricious in nature. But at the same time, man is also possessive about the property and women, because man can forget the death of his father, but he can never forget the death of his patrimony, okay, or the loss of his patrimony. Though Machiavelli has given the one-sided view, no one can say that his one-sided view is entirely wrong, okay. So the third advice is on the qualities of prince, okay. So we have seen his view on nature of profession. He is advising to the prince that how this profession is and what this profession is all about. Second, he is advising on the basis of what is the human nature, right? How humans are, how people are, the people whom the prince is going to rule. And the third advice which Machiavelli is giving to the prince is about the qualities of the prince. And since you are becoming or coming or wanting to come to the power, the prince should possess such and such qualities to be an effective ruler, okay. So let's see what are the qualities that Machiavelli is suggesting to the prince. So first quality, that prince should be clever like fox and brave like lion, right? So what is the analogy behind this particular statement? So see, there are two very sought after animals or beasts in any jungle, right? So fox is very clever, but when the fox is circumvented by wolves, he cannot defend the wolves, right? Because he lacks bravery, and hence he will circumvent to the death. But at the same time, the lion, who is very brave, who can defend any beast, cannot understand or cannot detect the traps, basic traps, because somewhere lion lacks that clever mind, right? And hence he is suggesting to the prince that he should be clever like fox and brave like lion, right? He should able to understand the traps. At the same time, he should be able to defend his enemies as well, because most of the time, what a cleverness can do, the brevity cannot do. And at the same time, what a brevity can do, a cleverness cannot do. Hence prince should be clever like fox and brave like lion. Prince must understand that politics is not a profession of goodness. Hence prince should know how to be bad than to be good. Hence, since we talked in the previous slides on the nature of profession, how the politics is not or different from ethics, and it is not a profession of goodness, prince should understand the realities about politics, and he should be always act as a bad than to be a good, okay. So prince should be clever like fox to understand the traps. He should be brave like lion to defend himself against the wolves. So this is the basic idea, okay. So what are the analysis and critical evaluation? So analysis is basically since the time of Plato, reason and courage are the qualities of the ruling class. So this is something which is being continuing from the ancient Greek times. Even the Plato, he suggested the virtue of the philosopher king is to be reason and courage. He should be more reasonable and also courageous, right? So this is something which we see in Aristotle and Machiavelli as well. But again, here Machiavelli is somewhere delineating ethics and politics. This is where he differentiates from the ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates and Plato. But this is something that a prince should be clever like fox and brave like lion, where a reason and courage are the qualities of the ruling class, is being continuing here, right? So there is a continuity in Plato and Machiavelli. What Plato tells is rather ambiguous sense, Machiavelli tells in explicit sense, right? So most of the time it becomes ambiguous to understand what does this reason and courage means when it comes to Plato's idea of philosopher king. But in the real sense, the Machiavelli tells in very explicit manner that the prince should be clever like fox and brave like lion, right? Similar view were represented by Kautilya in Indian context, right? There are sometimes questions asked to contrast the Machiavelli or the Western philosopher with the Indians, right? So the best proximity thinker which can be associated with Machiavelli is Kautilya. He also hailed from a realist school, who always looked very realistic situations of his time. Okay, so the views were very associative when it comes to Machiavelli and Kautilya. So Kautilya's view regarding interstate relations, okay, were very similar to that of Machiavelli. According to Kautilya, relations between states are like jungle where the strength of lions prevails. Okay, so this is the idea which Kautilya given, that states are like jungle, right? More realistic, more warlike situation where the strength of the lion prevails. In modern times, all states need intelligence and defense to protect themselves, which is very true. So let's see the critical evaluation according to Sabine. Again, the same critical evaluation which will also be applied here. That is, Machiavelli is narrowly dated and narrowly located. It is true that Machiavelli was child of his time, yet it would not be rational if we ignore Machiavelli's advice, right? Because his advice was very realistic, and most of the time Machiavelli is considered to be criticized for telling truth, right? Because most of the time the human beings or human psychology is devoid of truth. They are not easy accepting the truth, and hence though according to Sabine he is narrowly dated and narrowly located, his advice cannot be completely refuted. Okay, so Machiavelli is a realist who brings forth the reality of world of politics, and his advices cannot be ignored. Very true. Okay, this can be used as a conclusion. So that's it for today, people. So you can check your progress by answering these 3 questions that are describe Machiavelli conception of human nature that we have just discussed. That men are selfish, coward, and avaricious. Okay, the prince is the masterpiece of Machiavelli. Again, you can talk about the different instructions which are being given to the prince in his masterpiece, that is the prince. And the last question is, examine Machiavelli's advice on the prince for maintaining state. Okay, so these are the 3 questions, and you can send your answers in the email handle which has been mentioned here. I will check first few copies, and I'll for sure come back with feedback. Okay, so make sure to show your love as well by subscribing to the channel, that is UPSC Geek Guy NRG. And I am really overwhelmed by receiving different feedbacks and different perspective about the lecture series, and I'm also getting a lot of valuable ideas which I will try inculcating in further lectures as well, and I'll try making it a little bit more interactive as well as time approaches. Okay, so with this, let's end today's lecture, and thank you so much, aspirants, and remember to strive each day, because thus you strive so you thrive. Thank you so much.